Joining us on the program right now from Project 21, Christopher Arps is with us. Christopher, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Cam. Thank you for the opportunity.
You bet. And, listen, I mean, you've got your piece of changing culture doesn't mean changing the Constitution. Boy, can we change the culture so that little kids don't get suspended for acting like little kids?
Well, I'd like to see that. I mean, we're just taking away the imagination from children, and just like you said, he's going to be wondering what do I say next that might get me a suspension. I mean, it's thought we had free speech in this country, free expression.
I thought 7-year-olds could be 7-year-olds. I mean, I'm amazed by this. And as a parent, I mean, I've got 7-year-olds myself, and so I immediately put myself into the shoes of these parents. And if my kid was suspended for something like this, and he came to me and said, "Dad, like, what are the rules?" I'm not sure that I can explain to my 7-year-old what the rules are, other than I guess just keep your hands by your side all day long, and then you'll be okay.
Political correctness has run amok, my friend.
Yeah, no kidding. So, you write a change in the culture doesn't mean changing the Constitution. He says it's obvious the president wants to curtail our Second Amendment freedoms. You talk about American democracy called the grand experiment, not because of some romanticized fascination with ourselves, but from the understanding that the natural condition of mankind throughout history has been for man to govern himself in a non-democratic fashion. And I think that's something that a lot of Americans, and perhaps even a lot of people around the world, really do take for granted. We stand on the shoulders of giants. We stand on those that have come before us. We have this mentality that I hear more and more in America of, why do we need the Constitution? The Constitution's outdated. It was old. It was written by dead white guys who were slave owners. It's not meant for the 21st century. Therefore, we should just go ahead and scrap it. And there is a great amount of hubris that goes along with that thinking, Christopher.
Well, it does. And, the recent gun debate is what kind of motivated me to write that piece because, as you know, there are three legs of the Second Amendment. There's protection, and then there's hunting, and then there's also protecting us from the tyranny of the government. And it just seems like that type of thinking, or that third leg, is not being discussed because we've had a democracy for 220 years and peaceful transitions of government, and people have just kind of become complacent that something like that couldn't happen here. I mean, I also think that, citizens should have weapons just in case, God forbid, we're invaded by a foreign army or something. An army is going to be scared to come in to invade this country when they know the citizens are equipped with AR-15. So protects us from the government and from the tyranny of the government, and protects us from foreign governments trying to tyrannize us as well.
Well, and as you point out, it also protects us from, the petty tyrants who terrorize neighborhoods all across this country. When you say that heavy-handed gun control will disarm law-abiding citizens, leaving open the potential of eventually making good people prisoners in their own homes should criminals run amok in their communities. I mean, look, you could say you've described a lot of neighborhoods in Chicago.
Yeah, and I described a lot of neighborhoods here in St. Louis where I live. We're always vying with the number one spot for the most homicides in a community. So it's bad here. It's every night. It's 2 or 3 murders. We have pretty strong gun laws in the city of St. Louis, and, they're not doing any good, just like they're not in Chicago and in New York. Citizens should be armed and not be prisoners in their own homes.
Listen, I could not agree with you more, Christopher. And yet, people are going to say, Christopher, we need to get these guns out of these communities that are plagued by gun violence. We can talk about reforming the criminal justice system. We can talk about tougher sentences, but what we need to do is go after the guns. What do you say when the focus is on the guns rather than the individuals in these communities? I mean, look, if you go into the roughest neighborhood in St. Louis and you talk to the people who live there, and you say, do you know who the worst of the worst is here? Who's the one guy, if you could take off the streets? I guarantee you people can give you names.
Oh, sure, definitely. Well, I think what you're ultimately talking about is prohibition, and we've had that experiment already in this country with alcohol prohibition, and it doesn't work. If people want to get a product that's made illegal, they're going to find a way to get it. And that's the same thing that's going to happen with guns. You're going to take the guns out of the hands of law-abiding citizens, and the criminals and these gangs that are financed by drug lords in Mexico and other factors are going to get these folks guns. It's just something you can't stop. I'm not talking about just throwing our hands up in the air and just saying let it become the Wild West.
Right.
But I mean, at least make it a fair fight that the citizen can be armed.
No, listen.
And I take. Oh,
Yeah,
go ahead.
no. Finish your thought, Christopher. I'm sorry.
And I'm just saying that I believe in the philosophy that if a criminal doesn't know that a citizen is armed, then that is the best protection for the citizen, because they may not want to attack them if they know that they're armed. And I think that surprise element is something that we need. With today's crime.
Criminals have indicated that in surveys that have been done. Not every criminal says, yeah, that would get me to change their mind. But, a lot of criminals say, look, if I think that somebody has a gun, if I think that somebody is going to fight back, a lot of times they'll say, I move on. Because they are looking for that easy target. You look at England, where gun ownership is so rare, in hot burglaries, the burglaries in which the criminals know that someone is home. Those numbers are incredibly high. The last time I checked, it was over half of all of the burglaries in Great Britain were hot burglaries. The criminal knows someone's there, and they don't care, because they view the populace as so cowed and defenseless that they really have no fear of being confronted by a homeowner.
Yeah, and that is the problem. The criminals have no fear in us, and they have no fear of the justice system, because they know if they commit a crime and the system is so overwhelmed that they'll be out on the street in no time, and they can just keep committing their crimes. I mean, something has to change, and I'm worried about our country. I really am.
Where would you start, Christopher? I mean, if the president came to you tomorrow and said, all right, Christopher, I'm listening. Let's try to change the culture. And not even through legislation necessarily, but what's the first step? What's the first thing that you would do?
Well, the first thing, I think it starts with the families, and especially if you look at the dysfunction and the breakdown of the African-American family. I mean, most of these kids, young juveniles that are out committing these crimes come from homes where their mother was a teenager when they had them. There's no father in the household. There's really nothing for them to do, if they're in school or after school, and the gang has basically taken the place of the father. I mean, this is a problem that has been going on for the last 40, 45 years, and it's not a problem that you're going to solve, anytime quickly. But I think the first thing is you just have to start with regenerating the African American family and dysfunctional families, and have these kids, let them have something to do and have something to look forward to. If you talk to a lot of these kids, they don't expect to live till they're 20 years old. I mean, if they're 20 years old, they're an old man in that culture. They have no future. We've got to give them some type of hope and some type of future.
Talking with Christopher Arps from Project 21, and I think you're right about that, Christopher, and that is so heartbreaking. When you hear these young men, and in some cases these boys who are even as young as 11, 12 years old. I remember talking to a gang sergeant out in California. He worked with the LA County Sheriff's Office for 20 years, and he said, we've got the anti-gang programs starting in 7th grade. He said by the time these kids hear the anti-gang message, a lot of them are already in gangs in 7th grade. I said, well, when would you start it? And he said, kindergarten. He said, I would start the anti-gang programs in kindergarten, because not only are we having to fight back against the gangs, in a lot of cases we're having to push back against dad and mom and older brother and the family unit that have that may be home to multi-generational gang members now.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. That that's a staggering thought, and it is a scary thought when you've got to break. Not only do you have to try to restore a family, but you've got to break down that pseudo family, the family structure that's sort of arisen in place of a real family. Because it seems to me like a lot of times when you talk to these young gang members, what they are looking for is the older mentor. They are looking for structure. Bizarrely enough, they may find more structure in a gang than they do in their homes.
Yes, exactly. And that's what, I'm a black conservative, and that's one thing that, we argue for is, a government program, as we've seen, has not worked. I mean, the way that we're going to make inroads in the community, it's black conservatives that live in the suburbs or so-called quote-unquote make it. to coming back into the community and trying to mentor some of these kids and let them know that they have a future, that they don't have to be a football or a baseball or basketball star to make it, that, why not be a dentist or own a business or have an ordinary 9 to 5, and you can be successful in this country. I mean, that's what, one of the bad things, segregation was bad, but one of the bad things that kind of happened out of it was, at that time in segregation, you had the black dentist living next to the blue collar worker, and everyone was in the same community. And then after segregation, people moved out to better neighborhoods, and the young people didn't have those examples to look up to anymore. And that was a big reason for our dysfunction in our families.
It's interesting, and we could talk all afternoon, Christopher, because as a white conservative who's the stepfather of a couple of biracial kids who grew up in the inner city, this is an issue that I've always taken very personally. Because my own son is 21. If he had continued and grown up his entire life in Camden, New Jersey, his life might have turned out very differently, and I realize that every day through no fault of his mom. Maybe through no fault of his own, but you have incredible societal and community pressures on you to do the wrong thing a lot of times, and that's something that we got to work on as well. Listen, Christopher, thank you so much for your time today, sir. Great talking to you. Hope we can have you back on again soon.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and you have a great day, Cam.